Hi, my name is Savannah. My sister banned me from her party and mocked my little girl. Can you imagine the pain of being humiliated in front of the people who are supposed to love you? But it gets worse. Not only did she exclude me, she tried to tear us down every chance she got. But then something happened that changed everything. A simple sentence from a driver turned our lives upside down. This house is yours now. What happens when the truth is laid bare, and the tables are finally turned? Keep watching to find out. It had been a while since I'd seen Raven, and I was hopeful. Maybe this time, things would be different. My daughter, Maggie, was bouncing in the back seat, excited to see her cousins. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon in late spring, the kind of day that felt like everything should be right in the world. The house we were heading to was tucked away in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knew each other's names. I had hopes that this birthday party could be the start of healing, of mending the rift that had grown between Raven and me. I pulled into the driveway and took a deep breath. The sounds of Maggie's chatter faded as I stepped out of the car. I smiled at her as she ran ahead toward the house, her enthusiasm contagious. I followed, my heart light, though a small voice in the back of my mind kept whispering that things were never that simple. Still, I was determined to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could reconnect today. I had missed my sister, and I had hoped that this family gathering would put things back on track. As we entered the house, the familiar smells of cake and freshly brewed coffee filled the air. A few family members had already arrived, laughing and chatting, the usual noise of a family reunion. But as soon as Raven spotted us, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The tension was subtle, but it was there. Maggie was thrilled, though, running straight to her cousins, unaware of anything but the excitement of the day. Raven greeted us, her arms open in a half-hearted hug, as if the distance between us hadn't been growing for years. "You made it," she said, her tone neutral but strained. I nodded, my heart sinking. The warmth I had hoped for wasn't there. Not yet. Savannah watched her daughter run off, but there was a knot in her stomach that had only tightened as the moments passed. She had hoped this day would be a new beginning. Instead, it felt like stepping into an old wound. Maggie, innocent and unaware of the subtle tension in the room, shouted to Savannah, "Mom, look!" Her words rang out, full of excitement. Savannah froze. There it was, her daughter's joyful exclamation, the word that would soon be weaponized. Raven turned toward the sound, and Savannah watched as her sister's smile twisted into something bitter. Raven's voice sliced through the air as she mocked, "You shouldn't call her that, sweetie. She's not really your mom, you know." The words hit Savannah like a slap in the face. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't let it show. Not here. Not in front of Maggie. She swallowed her anger, her shame, her confusion. She glanced around at the family, hoping someone, anyone, would step in. But there was nothing. Just awkward glances, murmurs in the background, and a growing silence. Maggie didn't seem to understand, but the sting was already deep. Savannah could feel her daughter's innocence fading, a moment of innocence lost, but she had no idea how to fix it. Not yet. The gift exchange began shortly after, the room buzzing with excitement as Raven handed out presents. Savannah watched silently, clutching her own gift tightly, watching as Maggie played with her cousins, oblivious to the growing emotional weight pressing down on her mother. Raven passed out gift after gift, but when it came time for Maggie to receive hers, there was nothing. No acknowledgement, no present for the little girl. Savannah's heart sank. She watched, her hands trembling, as Raven moved on, acting as if Maggie didn't even exist. Maggie, in her sweet innocence, glanced up at Savannah and asked quietly, "Why didn't I get a gift?" The question cut through Savannah's heart like a knife. She didn't know how to respond. The words caught in her throat. How could she explain this to her daughter? To herself? How do you protect your child from something like this? From being ignored, from being treated like she didn't matter? Savannah's mind raced. She wanted to shout, to scream at her sister for her cruelty, but instead, she just stood there. Her heart was heavy, her thoughts consumed by the injustice. It was hard to breathe. It was harder to accept that Raven was treating her like this in front of Maggie. The silence in the room grew louder with every passing second. She couldn't just ignore it anymore. The evening stretched on, but the cracks were widening, and they were too deep to ignore now. As the last guests left, Savannah stood in the doorway, her thoughts spinning. She had tried to keep the peace, to put aside the years of tension between them. But it was clear that Raven wasn't interested in reconciliation. This wasn't about healing, it was about control, about making Savannah feel small, like she didn't belong. Savannah took one last look around the room, the soft hum of the kitchen lights overhead, the sound of the door closing behind the last guest. Her frustration was boiling over, but she kept her composure. For Maggie. But it was a thin thread, a fragile control. The anger was there, simmering under the surface, ready to explode. As she closed the door behind her, Savannah knew things had changed. There was no going back. She wouldn't let her family tear her down any longer. This would be the moment that changed everything. The house felt empty when we returned. It wasn't just the silence, it was the weight of everything that had happened. Maggie had run off to her room, already immersed in some new game, while I stood in the doorway, still wearing the invisible sting from the party. My eyes kept darting back to the kitchen table where I had set the gift I had carefully wrapped. Maggie hadn't gotten one. And I could still hear Raven's mocking laughter echoing in my ears. I tried to steady my breath, the anger bubbling up in me. I had kept it together for Maggie, for the sake of avoiding a scene, but now, here, in the quiet of my own home, there was no more pretending. The hurt I had tried to keep at bay was flooding back in waves, relentless. And worse, there was this creeping realization, my family, my own sister, didn't see me. Not the way they should. Not the way a sister should see her family. I sank into the couch, running a hand through my hair. I could still hear Maggie's quiet question, echoing in my mind. Why didn't I get a gift? It felt like a punch to the gut, and every time I thought about it, the pain sharpened. What was I supposed to say to her? How do I protect her from this? How do I explain that her family, her own flesh and blood, had just rejected her in front of everyone? The knot in my chest tightened. I couldn't let this slide. Not again. I had made excuses for Raven too many times before. I had allowed her to be cruel, to brush things off, to act as if nothing mattered. But I couldn't protect Maggie from this, not anymore. Not when the wound was this deep. I stood up abruptly, pacing around the living room. There was no way I was going to let Raven get away with this. Not without a confrontation. But this time, I wasn't going to shout, or yell. I wasn't going to let her pull me into one of her dramatic arguments. I had learned that over the years. It was better to be strategic, to make her see exactly what she had done, to make her feel the weight of it without me losing my cool. Maggie's voice broke through my thoughts. Why don't Grandma and Grandpa like me? The words froze me in my tracks. It was a question I hadn't been ready to answer. How could I? What could I say? I turned to her, forcing a smile onto my face, and knelt down to her level. It's not that, sweetie, I said softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Sometimes people act in ways that aren't fair, but it's not your fault. Never forget that. But even as I said the words, I knew I wasn't just trying to protect her from the hurt. I was protecting myself too, from the shame, from the guilt. Because deep down, I knew that the real answer was a lot uglier. And I wasn't sure how to explain it to her. Or to myself. The next morning, the weight of yesterday's events didn't ease. If anything, it had gotten worse. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Raven. Maggie was just being a bit too sensitive. You know how she is. I thought you'd want to move past this. Anyway, hope she had a nice time. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. The casualness of it, the dismissive tone, it was like she hadn't even seen the hurt. She hadn't seen Maggie's face when she didn't get a gift. She hadn't noticed how Maggie shrunk inside herself, how her confidence had faltered for just a moment. And Raven, with her passive-aggressive approach, was trying to sweep it under the rug as if it were nothing. It was then that I realized something important. This wasn't just about a gift. It wasn't even about the party. This was about respect, about what my family thought I was worth. And I had spent far too long allowing them to push me around, allowing them to make me feel small. I had been a fool to think they would change, to think that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. I put the phone down, my fingers trembling. The anger, the frustration, the pain, It was all bubbling over now. This was no longer about protecting Maggie from Raven's cruelty. This was about reclaiming my own dignity. My own space in this family. I wasn't going to let Raven off the hook anymore. I wasn't going to let her treat me, or Maggie, like this without facing the consequences. No more excuses. No more silence. But I didn't know exactly what that looked like yet. I didn't know how I was going to confront her, whether it would be in person or something more indirect. But I did know this: I was done taking the back seat in my own life. I wasn't just going to sit idly by while my family trampled all over me. I had to stand up for myself. And for Maggie. I made a decision. This wasn't just about the gift or the party. This was about reclaiming my place in my own family. This was about standing tall and being respected, no matter the cost. The morning after the party was quieter than usual. The sound of Maggie's small footsteps as she moved around the house felt almost foreign, too calm for what had happened the day before. She was already sitting at the kitchen table, picking at her cereal, eyes distant. I didn't blame her. After everything that had happened, she probably wasn't sure what to make of it all. She didn't fully understand why she hadn't gotten a gift, or why her Aunt Raven had mocked her so openly. But I could see it on her face, the confusion, the hurt. I sat across from her, trying to act normal. It was a struggle, to be honest. How do you pretend everything's okay when your heart is still heavy with the things that were said, the looks exchanged, and the subtle exclusions? How much longer could I keep pretending? I wasn't sure anymore. But I had to, for her. As I watched Maggie absentmindedly twirl her spoon in her bowl, my mind kept circling back to the previous day. Raven's words still rang in my ears: "She's not really your mom, you know." That sentence, the casual cruelty in it, cut deeper than I wanted to admit. And the way she handed gifts to everyone but Maggie, the awkward silence that followed. I couldn't let that go. I couldn't let my daughter feel like she wasn't worth something to her own family. I had been pretending for too long. Trying to avoid confrontation, trying to keep the peace. But I wasn't sure I could do it anymore. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. The phone rang, breaking my thoughts. It was my mom. I picked up, my heart sinking even before I answered. "Hey, honey, how are you holding up?" My mom's voice was calm, almost too calm. The kind of voice you use when you're trying to smooth things over. "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile that no one could see. "Just getting through the morning." There was a brief pause before she continued. "Listen, I know things got a little tense yesterday, but you've got to make peace with Raven. You know how she is. You've got to let this go. It's better for everyone, especially Maggie." The words hit me like a slap. My family, yet again, pushing me to be the peacemaker. To ignore the wrongs done to us and pretend like everything was fine. They wanted me to smooth things over, to forgive, to forget. "I can't just pretend like nothing happened," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "You didn't see what happened, Mom. Raven mocked Maggie in front of everyone. She didn't even get a gift." My mom sighed, the sound full of quiet disappointment. "Honey, you know how Raven is. She didn't mean anything by it. Maggie's just a little too sensitive. You've got to move past this." It was clear now. My mom wasn't just dismissing what had happened. She was telling me, indirectly, that I should forgive and forget, again. And this time, I wasn't going to. Not without standing up for myself, for Maggie. I wasn't going to let this family sweep everything under the rug anymore. I felt a flash of anger rise within me. My family was asking me to bear the weight of their silence, their refusal to acknowledge the damage Raven had done. And I was done. Done being the one who always made excuses for them, done being the one who held everything together while they tore each other apart. After the call ended, I sat there for a while, letting the weight of it settle in. I could feel the anger in my chest, hot and tight. It was a different kind of anger now. It wasn't just about being hurt. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and Maggie's too. I wasn't going to let my sister or anyone else walk all over me anymore. But just as I was steeling myself for what I knew had to come next, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Raven was talking to Dad in the next room. I could hear her voice, smooth and practiced, trying to downplay everything. "It's not that big a deal. She's just being overly dramatic. She'll get over it. Maggie's fine, and so is Savannah. I froze. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, each word stoking the fire inside me. How could she? How could she twist the truth like that, make me the villain for standing up for my daughter? I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. I stood up and walked into the living room, the conversation between Raven and Dad still echoing in my mind. I didn't want to hear any more of it. I needed to confront them both. Right then, right there. Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. I need to talk to you. He turned, his face softening when he saw me. What's going on, honey? You okay? I could feel the lump in my throat, but I wasn't going to back down. This was it. No, I'm not okay. Not anymore. I'm done pretending that everything is fine when it's not. Raven's been treating me and Maggie like we don't matter. She mocks my daughter in front of everyone, and you just sit there and let it happen. You've always let her get away with it. Dad looked uncomfortable, his eyes flickering nervously. Savannah, don't. No, I cut him off, my voice shaking but firm. I've been putting everyone else's feelings ahead of mine for too long. You let Raven tear this family apart, and I can't stay silent anymore. I'm not going to be the one who always lets things go just for the sake of peace. He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't wait for him to say anything. I had made my decision. I wasn't backing down. I'm done, I said, my voice low but steady. I'm not going to let this go. Not anymore. I'm standing up for myself, and I'm standing up for Maggie. And if that means making some people uncomfortable, so be it. I turned and walked away, not waiting for my father's response. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I knew something had shifted. I wasn't that same woman who had let things slide anymore. I was done being passive. It was time to fight for what was right. The morning felt heavy as I sat at the kitchen table, the sound of the clock ticking louder than usual. Maggie was still quietly eating her cereal, absorbed in her thoughts, but I could see that she wasn't fully present. Her usual cheerfulness had been replaced with a distant gaze, a quiet sadness that I couldn't shake. How could I explain to her what had happened yesterday, when I barely understood it myself? The cruel remarks, the exclusion, the way Raven had turned everything against me. I had to do something. For Maggie's sake, if nothing else. I had spent most of the night replaying the events over and over, my mind refusing to let go of the words Raven had said. She's not really your mom, you know. And then, the moment Maggie didn't get a gift, while everyone else did. How long was I supposed to sit back and let this happen? How many times was I supposed to stay silent, make excuses for my sister, for my family? The truth was staring me in the face. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. This morning, I had finally made up my mind. The passive acceptance had gone on for too long. I was done. Today, I was going to confront Raven, to demand that she look me in the eye and acknowledge what she had done. No more pretending, no more brushing it under the rug. I couldn't do that to Maggie, and I couldn't do that to myself. I stood up from the table, taking a deep breath as I tried to steady myself. I had been practicing what I was going to say to Raven. But every time I rehearsed the words in my head, they came out wrong, too soft, too tentative. I couldn't sound weak, not now. I had to be firm, but calm. I had to speak the truth, without fear of how it would be received. I walked over to the window, staring out into the quiet morning. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for Maggie. She needed to know that I would always stand up for her, that I would protect her from the toxic people who tried to tear us down. It was time for me to stop holding it all inside. It was time for me to fight. As I stood there, lost in thought, the phone rang. It was my mother. My heart sank as I reached for the phone. I already knew what this was going to be. Savannah, honey, my mom's voice was smooth, almost rehearsed. How are you holding up today? I bit my lip. I'm fine, Mom. Just trying to get through the morning. She sighed, the sound full of hidden meaning. Look, I know things were tense yesterday, but we need to let it go. You've got to make peace with Raven. For the sake of the family. I froze. This was it. The same pressure, the same words I had heard over and over again. You've got to make peace. It always came down to me. Always. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. "Mom, I can't just pretend like nothing happened," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Raven mocked Maggie. "She didn't even get a gift, and no one said anything. I can't let that slide." There was a long pause on the other end. Then my mom's voice dropped lower, her tone taking on that familiar, dismissive edge. "It's not that big of a deal, honey. You know how Raven is. She didn't mean anything by it. Maggie's just being too sensitive. You've got to move past it. For everyone's sake." I could feel my blood begin to boil. I didn't let it show, but inside, everything was snapping. I couldn't believe this. For years, I had been expected to keep the peace, to let everyone else's behavior slide, to stay silent when it was clear that I was being pushed aside. "No more." "Mom, this isn't just about a misunderstanding," I said, my voice tight. "This is about respect. Raven doesn't respect me, and she sure as hell doesn't respect Maggie. I won't keep quiet about it anymore." Another long pause. I could hear my mom take a breath, as if preparing to speak. But before she could, I ended the call. I couldn't listen to her anymore. She wasn't going to change. She would always take Raven's side. I stared at the phone in my hand for a moment, letting the silence settle over me. It was time. No more talking. No more reasoning. Today, I was going to confront Raven. I was going to make her see the damage she had done. I took one last look at Maggie, who was still quietly eating her breakfast, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I couldn't let this affect her anymore. She deserved better. I deserved better. The drive to Raven's house felt like an eternity. My heart was racing, my hands gripping the wheel. I tried to steady my breath, but the tension was unbearable. When I finally arrived, I took a moment to gather myself. I wasn't going to let Raven see me falter. Not now. I rang the doorbell and waited, my stomach twisting into knots. Raven opened the door with that practiced smile she always wore, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. She wasn't expecting this. "What do you want, Savannah?" she asked, the words clipped, like she was already preparing for a confrontation. "I'm here to talk," I said, my voice firm. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday." Raven let out a sigh, rolling her eyes as if she was bored with the conversation before it even began. "It was just a misunderstanding. You're blowing this way out of proportion." The dismissal hit harder than I expected, but I didn't let it show. I crossed my arms and took a step forward. "No, Raven. You're rewriting the story. You mocked Maggie, you excluded her, and you're acting like it didn't happen. Well, I'm not going to let you get away with it anymore." Her eyes narrowed, the usual charm fading from her face. She tried to manipulate the situation, her words dripping with false sincerity. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone, but you're making a bigger deal out of this than it is. This is family, Savannah. You should understand that." I shook my head, fighting back the urge to shout. "No. You don't get to turn this around. This is your pattern, Raven. You use guilt and manipulation to control everyone, and I've had enough. I'm done pretending that I don't see it." Raven's face hardened. "You're being ridiculous." I stood taller, my voice steady. "No. You're the one who's ridiculous, Raven. And I'm not going to let you gaslight me anymore." In that moment, I saw something shift in her. A flash of anger crossed her face, and I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. "You're not a part of this family anymore, Savannah," Raven hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You've never really belonged here." The words stung, but they didn't break me. They only made me stronger. "You can't push me out anymore," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "Not me. Not Maggie. I'm done letting you tear us down." Raven's eyes flashed with fury, and I knew she wasn't going to let this go easily. But I didn't care. I was ready for the battle. I woke up that morning to an empty house. Maggie was still asleep, which gave me a few precious moments of solitude, but the weight of the previous days hung over me like a heavy cloud. I didn't want to get out of bed, didn't want to face the reality that my family was never going to be the same again. But I had to. The confrontation with Raven hadn't just shaken things, it had cracked them wide open. I had stood up for myself, and now, I was left to deal with the aftermath. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, reflecting on the choice I made. It had been so sudden, so raw, but I knew deep down that it had been necessary. For Maggie's sake, if nothing else. I had to stand up for her, for both of us. The silence after the confrontation felt deafening. The silence from Raven, from my parents. I had expected some kind of resolution, maybe an apology, but what I got instead was a wall of cold indifference. As I slowly got out of bed, I thought about how much I had hoped for things to be different. How many times had I wished things could go back to normal, that my family would just accept me for who I was. I had let myself believe that one day they would finally understand. But I couldn't keep holding on to that hope. Raven's actions had shown me the truth, things would never change. She would always be the one in control, and I would always be the outsider, the one who had to swallow her pride and keep quiet. But I couldn't do that anymore. I walked to the kitchen, where Maggie was sitting, quietly coloring at the table. She looked up at me with those innocent eyes, as if everything was still okay. I couldn't let her see how broken I felt. I had to keep going, for her. But a part of me was still angry. Angry at my family. Angry at Raven for tearing us apart. Angry at myself for thinking that maybe, just maybe, we could be a family again. As I began making breakfast, my phone buzzed on the counter. I reached over to grab it, already knowing it was from my parents. The moment I saw their names on the screen, a knot tightened in my stomach. I didn't want to deal with this. Not now, not ever. But I answered anyway, trying to keep my voice steady. "Savannah," my mom said, her tone casual, but I could sense the underlying judgment. "We need to talk about what happened with Raven." I took a deep breath, trying not to let the frustration bubble to the surface. "I don't think there's much to say," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happened is pretty clear." My mom sighed, the sound thick with disappointment. "Savannah, I understand that you're upset, but this isn't the way to handle things. Family is about forgiveness, about moving on. You've caused a lot of drama, and it's affecting everyone." Her words hit harder than I expected. They weren't even trying to understand. They were just blaming me, like they always did. I had always been the one to keep the peace, to make excuses for them, but now? Now, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. "You don't get it, Mom," I said, my voice shaking with the weight of everything I was holding in. "Raven mocked Maggie, in front of everyone. And you want me to just let it go? You want me to act like it never happened?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I know you're hurt, honey," my mom finally said, her voice softer, almost apologetic. "But this kind of thing happens in families. You have to move past it." I couldn't breathe. The words were suffocating. "No, I don't. I don't have to keep letting her walk all over me. I'm not going to be silent anymore." The line went dead silent, and for a moment, I thought she was going to hang up. But then I heard her voice, quiet and distant. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I didn't respond. What was there to say? They would never understand. I hung up, setting the phone down slowly on the counter, feeling the weight of it all settle deeper into my chest. I was on my own. There was no going back. As I prepared breakfast for Maggie, I found my mind racing. I had known the conversation with my parents wouldn't go well, but hearing their disapproval, hearing them tell me that I was the one in the wrong, it stung in a way I hadn't anticipated. I felt more isolated than ever. They didn't understand the pain I had been carrying for so long. They didn't understand what it was like to constantly be dismissed, to constantly have to swallow my anger and my hurt for the sake of family harmony. I wasn't going to let them do it to me anymore. Just as I placed a plate of pancakes in front of Maggie, there was a knock at the door. I froze, unsure of who it was. No one else knew I was home. With a deep breath, I walked over to the door, opening it to find Sarah standing there, her warm smile a welcome sight. "Hey, girl," she said, her voice light but full of concern. "I thought I'd come by. See how you're holding up." I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't realized how much I needed her presence until now. Sarah had always been there for me, through thick and thin. I stepped aside, letting her in. She took one look at me and immediately pulled me into a tight hug. "You okay?" she asked, pulling back just enough to look at my face. I nodded, trying to keep the tears at bay. "I don't know anymore," I admitted. "I did what I had to do, but the pain is still there. I don't know if it's worth it." Sarah studied me for a moment, then took a deep breath. "Savannah, You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. What happened with Raven, it's not your fault. And if they can't see that, then maybe it's time you stop letting them dictate your life." Her words felt like a balm to my soul. "But what about Maggie?" I whispered. "What if I'm making it worse for her?" Sarah shook her head. "You're protecting her, Savannah. She needs to see that you'll fight for her, that you'll fight for what's right. She'll be okay. You're not alone in this." Just as I was beginning to feel a sense of relief, the phone rang again. I stared at the screen, knowing exactly who it was. My mother. With a sigh, I picked up the phone. "What is it, Mom?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Raven wants to talk to you," she said, her tone clipped. "She says she wants to apologize. I think it's time you two worked things out." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision bearing down on me. I had a choice to make. Go back to the same cycle of silence and submission, or stand firm and walk away. I wasn't sure which was the right choice, but I knew that whatever I decided, it was going to change everything. I woke up early that morning, the sunlight creeping through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. The air felt still, but my mind was anything but calm. The confrontation with Raven had left me raw. The anger was still simmering under the surface, but something deeper was emerging too, a resolve that had been building quietly in the background. I had no idea how long I could keep pretending everything was fine, but I knew one thing for certain: the time for silence was over. It had been a few days since that moment at the coffee shop, where everything between me and Raven had finally erupted. The emotional toll was heavier now than I had imagined, and as much as I hated to admit it, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice. There was no going back. I wasn't going to let this mess continue. I had to face the truth, whatever it cost me. Maggie had sensed the tension, of course. She was always so in tune with my emotions, and her innocent questions cut deep. "Mom, are we going to see Aunt Raven again?" she'd asked the other day, her wide eyes full of hope. And all I could do was look at her and lie, telling her things would get better. But would they? How many times had I told myself the same thing? I shook my head, pushing those thoughts aside. I couldn't afford to lose my focus now. The truth was going to hurt, but it had to be told. I had to stand up, even if it meant losing everything. "No more hiding," I whispered to myself. "It's time to be the woman I've always known I am. If they can't accept me, that's their loss." It was time. A few hours later, my phone rang. The number on the screen was one I didn't want to see, but I knew it was coming. Raven. She'd reached out again, asking to meet. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to walk away, but another part of me knew that this was the moment. She was trying to manipulate me again, trying to erase everything that happened as if it was just a misunderstanding. I let the phone ring for a few seconds before answering, taking a deep breath. "Hello, Savannah, it's Raven. We need to talk." Her voice was smooth, calculating, the same way it always was when she wanted something from me. "What is it now?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. I wasn't going to let her off the hook so easily. "I think we've both said things we didn't mean," she continued. "I'm willing to fix things, really. Can we just meet and talk about it? Maybe clear the air?" I felt the anger bubbling up inside me, but I forced it down. "I'm done playing games, Raven. You can't just expect me to forgive and forget, not after everything that's happened." There was a pause, a brief silence before she spoke again. "I think you're overreacting. We're family, Savannah. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I closed my eyes, taking a moment to gather myself. "I'll meet you, but this time, there are boundaries. I'm not going to sit here and let you manipulate me anymore. This isn't about keeping the peace, it's about finally facing the truth." She tried to push back, but I cut her off. "I'll be at the coffee shop in an hour. You want to talk? Then talk." When I hung up, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. This was it. There was no going back now. I wasn't going to be silent anymore. Not for Raven, not for anyone. I was ready to finally say what needed to be said. The coffee shop was quiet when I arrived. The familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the soft hum of conversation. I found a table by the window, tapping my fingers nervously on the cup in front of me. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my posture straight, determined. I couldn't let her see how much she had affected me. And then she walked in. Raven, as polished as ever, her hair neatly styled, her posture confident. But there was something in her eyes, something that looked up almost like fear. "Savannah," she said, her voice light, as if we were meeting for a casual chat. "It's good to see you." I didn't smile. "Cut the pleasantries, Raven. Let's get to it." She sat down, her fingers tapping on the table nervously, the facade slipping for a moment. "Look, I know things got heated, but I just don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this. You're overreacting. You know I didn't mean what I said to Maggie." I clenched my jaw, keeping my voice even. "You mocked her, Raven. You made her feel like she wasn't part of this family. And you know what? It's not the first time. You've done this for years. And I've stood by, silently letting you walk all over me, but not anymore." Raven's expression shifted, her defensiveness growing. "You're making me sound like a villain. You've always been the drama queen, Savannah. You're the one who blows everything out of proportion." I leaned forward, my gaze steady. "No. You've been playing games with all of us, manipulating everyone around you to get what you want. And I'm done with it. The truth is, you've never cared about me, about Maggie, or about anything other than keeping control. I'm not going to let you do that anymore." Her face reddened, and she stood up suddenly, pushing her chair back with force. "I'm trying to make this right, but you're making it impossible," she snapped, her voice rising. I stayed seated, calm, unwavering. "You don't get it, do you? You've been tearing this family apart, and I'm not going to be the one to fix it anymore. Not at the cost of my dignity. Not at the cost of Maggie's." Her eyes flashed with something, anger, maybe, but then, as if realizing she was losing control, she smirked. "You know, Savannah, it's funny. You think you've won, but I know something about you. Something that could destroy your reputation. You want to keep going down this road?" My heart stopped, my blood running cold. What was she talking about? She stepped back, her smile cold. "Think about it, Savannah. You've got a lot more to lose than you think." The words hung in the air, like a dark cloud ready to burst. I didn't know what she knew, but I knew one thing: this fight was far from over. I woke up that morning with a sense of finality hanging in the air. The weight of everything I'd been through, the battles, the betrayal, the confrontation, had taken its toll. But it had also forged something within me, a resolve that I had never known before. This was it. The moment I had been dreading and preparing for. There was no turning back now. I stared at myself in the mirror, the reflection staring back at me as if questioning my very being. A few years ago, I would have crumbled at the thought of this moment. A few months ago, I would have swallowed my pride and walked away, pretending everything was fine. But not today. Today, I was ready. "This is it," I whispered to myself. "No more excuses. I've let them push me for too long, and I'm done pretending it doesn't hurt." I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders. I knew what was at stake, everything. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and my future. And it was time to face Raven head on. The coffee shop felt colder than usual when I arrived. I had gotten there early, hoping the space would calm my nerves, but nothing could quite settle the storm inside me. I kept reminding myself that I was doing the right thing, that I had to stand up for myself. But the fear still lingered. What if Raven had something on me? What if this confrontation ended up ruining everything I had worked so hard to build? My phone buzzed. Raven had texted. "I'll be there in 5. Please, let's talk. This can be fixed." I didn't respond right away. I needed to focus. This wasn't about making things right with her, it was about setting boundaries and protecting myself from the lies she had built around me. Then, I saw her walk in. She was the same as ever, put together, cold, and calculated. As if nothing had happened. As if I were just another person to be manipulated. She sat across from me without waiting for an invitation, her eyes scanning me, sizing me up. "I don't think we need to do this, you know," she said, leaning back in her chair. "I never meant for things to get this bad. Let's just move on." Her words felt like a slap to my face. I couldn't believe she was trying to smooth things over as if nothing had happened, as if the last few weeks were just a blip on the radar. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. My silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. Finally, she sighed, the familiar smirk playing at the corners of her lips. I know I messed up, okay? But you have to understand, I've been under a lot of pressure. You don't get it. Everyone expects me to be perfect all the time. I narrowed my eyes. No. You don't get it. You've been using everyone for your own gain. And I'm done with it. Raven leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You don't want to go down this road, trust me. You know what I know. And that could ruin you. My stomach churned. I knew exactly what she was talking about. The threat. The information she was holding over my head. The very thing that could unravel everything I had worked for. But I wasn't going to let it control me. I wasn't going to let her win. Whatever you think you have, it doesn't scare me anymore, I said, my voice steady, even. You don't have control over me anymore, Raven. Not with your lies. Not with your threats. For a second, her face faltered. I saw the crack in the facade. And that was when I knew I had the upper hand. But she wasn't going to back down easily. Maybe not now, she said, her voice softening. But you're just like me, Savannah. You can't change who you are. You'll always come crawling back. The words stung, but they weren't enough to break me. I wasn't the same person I used to be. Not anymore, I said firmly. I don't need your approval. I don't need your lies. This ends now. I could see the frustration in her eyes, but she quickly masked it. The cool, collected mask returned, but I could see the cracks, small but there. Then, she dropped the bombshell. I'm done playing nice, Savannah. You think you've won? Fine. But I know something about you. Something I can make everyone believe. One phone call, one picture, and everything you've built could be gone. My heart stopped. What was she talking about? Don't threaten me, Raven, I said, my voice shaking for the first time. I'm not threatening you. I'm just letting you know that you're not untouchable. Not anymore. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. You don't get it. I'm not scared of you anymore. I never should have been. Raven stood up too, her eyes flashing with something darker now. You'll regret this, she said coldly. And when you do, don't come crawling back to me. I won't, I said, my voice unwavering. Because I don't need you anymore. I walked out of that coffee shop with my head held high, but my chest was tight. Raven's words echoed in my mind. Was she bluffing? Or did she really have something that could bring everything down? I didn't know. But I was ready to face whatever came next. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the woman who had come so far. I hardly recognized her anymore. The old me would have been shaking in my boots, dreading what was about to unfold. But today, I felt something different, the calm before the storm. I was no longer the timid woman who let her family walk all over her. No. Today, I was reclaiming what was mine. The weight of the situation hung in the air. Everything I had fought for, my dignity, my future, my peace, was about to come to a head. I could feel it in my bones. The final confrontation with Raven was unavoidable, and I was ready. If I don't take control now, I'll never get another chance, I thought to myself. It was now or never. This wasn't just about my sister anymore. This was about me finally standing up for myself. It had taken me years to get to this point, to break free from the grip of my family's expectations, their judgments. But the time for silence was over. I was done being the doormat. The fear? It was still there, sure, but it wasn't going to stop me. The car ride to the restaurant was silent. The only sound was the hum of the engine, my thoughts swirling. I'd made peace with the fact that this might be the last time I ever spoke to Raven, and that was a hard pill to swallow. But there was no going back now. This was my moment. If I walked away from it, I would lose everything I had worked so hard to gain. I arrived at the restaurant and sat at the table, my nerves buzzing. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, "You've got this. I'm proud of you." I read it twice, taking a moment to savor the support. Sarah had always been my rock, and I needed her strength today more than ever. Then, I saw Raven. She walked in like she owned the place, her usual smug smile plastered across her face. She wasn't nervous. No, she thought she had the upper hand. She sat down across from me, her eyes narrowing slightly as if sizing me up. "So, you're really going through with this?" she asked, her voice smooth but tinged with something else. She wasn't afraid, but I could see the shift in her demeanor. She was waiting for me to fold. I didn't. "Yes, I am," I replied, my voice calm. "This since today." She leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "You know, I've been thinking about everything you've said. I'm sorry for how things went down. But let's not make this harder than it has to be. We're family." I shook my head. "No. We're not family. Not anymore. Not when you've lied and manipulated everyone just to get your way." Her smile faltered. "You've always been so dramatic, Savannah. But, if you really want to keep this up, I guess we can. Just know, you'll regret this. There's a lot I know that could ruin you." I held my breath. I knew what she was referring to. The secret she thought she could use against me. But I wasn't afraid. "Not anymore." "Let's see what you've got," I said, my voice firm. At that moment, Raven reached into her bag and pulled out a file. She laid it on the table with a flourish, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "I think this is the end of the road for you. I have a recording. A recording that will make everything you've worked for crumble." I felt the blood drain from my face, but I didn't let it show. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for. The moment Raven thought she could break me. But I wasn't going to let her. "I'm not scared of you, Raven," I said, my hands steady. "You think that recording will destroy me? I have something that will destroy you." Her face twisted in confusion. "What are you talking about?" I slid a piece of paper across the table. Raven's eyes flicked to it, then back to me. "That's right. You've been busy, haven't you? Your little scheme was exposed weeks ago. You thought I didn't know, but I have the evidence. It's all here." I watched as Raven's confidence wavered. She shifted in her seat, her fingers trembling slightly. "You're bluffing," she said, though the crack in her voice betrayed her. "No, I'm not," I replied. "And I'm done playing these games." For the first time, Raven didn't know what to do. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but there was none. This was it. The truth had come out, and there was nothing she could do to turn it around. Her face twisted in anger. "You think you've won? You're nothing without me. You'll always be that broken little girl who needed me to fix everything. No matter how much you fight, you'll never escape who you are." I stood up, my voice rising. "I'm not that girl anymore. And I don't need you. Not now, not ever." Raven's face turned pale, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. I could see the desperation in her eyes. She had no control. She had lost. I had taken back what was rightfully mine. "You'll regret this," she finally spat, but there was no conviction in her words. "Not as much as you will," I said, my voice cold. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. This battle was over. I had won. But as I stepped out into the cool night air, I couldn't help but wonder, what would the fallout be? Would my family ever forgive me? Would things ever truly be the same again? I sat quietly in the small cafe, the hum of conversation around me distant and muffled. The clink of cups and the soft chatter of the barista at the counter barely registered. My mind was far from the cozy atmosphere, wandering back through the mess of the past few months. The storm had passed, but the calm left behind was not the peaceful kind. It was the kind that made you realize just how much damage had been done. The battle with Raven had broken me, yes, but it had also rebuilt me in ways I hadn't expected. I had found strength I didn't know I had, and though I was still nursing the wounds, I understood something now that I didn't before: the power was mine, and I had to choose what to do with it. The scars were real, but they no longer had the power to define me. "The battle's over, but the scars remain," I thought to myself. "What now?" I let out a slow breath, running my fingers over the edge of my cup. It was one of those moments where you wonder if you're finally at peace, or if the quiet is just a temporary lull before another storm. The past week had been a blur. The tension that had weighed on me for so long had finally lifted, but the aftermath was complicated. Some relationships, those that I had fought so hard to repair, were fractured beyond repair. Yet, there were others, Unexpected allies, who had stepped forward, people who hadn't been part of the battle but had somehow become part of my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. I thought of Sarah, my steadfast friend, always there when I needed her most. I thought of Maggie, my daughter, and the future I was now shaping for her, a future that would be free from the toxic grip of my past. There was hope in that. Real, honest hope. Then, just as I was beginning to feel like I could breathe again, the weight of the consequences settled back on my shoulders. My family. The damage was done. Raven's manipulation had stretched so far, and I was left in the wake of it, trying to make sense of what remained. A few hours later, I received a message. It was from an old cousin, someone I hadn't heard from in years. She didn't know everything that had happened, but she had heard the whispers, the rumors. And she offered her support, in her own way. It wasn't much, but it was something. She wanted to be there for me, to help me rebuild what had been lost. It felt like a lifeline, one I hadn't expected, and I grasped onto it. I didn't know what the future held, but this moment, this quiet gesture, felt like the first real step towards something better. But as I sat there, sipping my coffee and letting the warmth settle in my chest, I knew this wasn't the end. Not really. There was still one thing left. One final decision I had to make. The question hovered in my mind like a storm cloud. Would I forgive? Or would I hold on to the anger, the hurt, that had been a constant companion for far too long? The decision loomed over me. I thought about Raven, about all the things she had done, the lies, the manipulations. Could I let that go? Could I ever forgive her? The truth was, forgiveness wasn't just about her. It wasn't about excusing what she'd done or pretending it didn't matter. No, it was about freeing myself. About cutting the last strings that tied me to the past, to the woman I used to be, the woman who couldn't move on. I closed my eyes and took another deep breath. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, I whispered under my breath. It means freeing yourself. A weight lifted from my chest as I made the choice. I didn't need to carry the burden anymore. But I wasn't about to pretend it hadn't happened. I wasn't going to act like things could just go back to normal. It wasn't easy. And it wasn't quick. But I felt the shift inside me, the moment when I knew I had finally let go. I stood up from the table, feeling the weight of the decision settle into my bones. It was time to walk away from the past, to leave behind the hurt that had defined so much of my life. As I stepped out into the cool air, the world felt different. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. Free from the chains of family expectations, free from the manipulation, free from the anger. I walked down the street, my footsteps sure. The past would always be there, a part of who I was. But it no longer had the power to control me. The future was waiting, and I was ready to embrace it. The last few months had been hell, but they had taught me one thing: I was strong. Stronger than I ever thought possible. And now, I was going to live for me,